Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me in the back?
Yes.
Very good. I think we'll get started. I'm very happy to see all of you here today, and realizing that some of you do not know me, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Carol Breslin, and I teach English here at Gwynedd-Mercy, and I direct our honors program. The event that we are all part of today is an event being sponsored by the students and the faculty of the Gwynedd-Mercy College Honors Program in observance of our 15th anniversary. And you may say to yourself, how does an honors program celebrate an anniversary? Kind of a peculiar thing to be doing, perhaps. Well, we celebrate it really by doing what we do every day, and that is pursuing academic excellence. And the event today is another opportunity for us to do just that, because we bring before you today Dr. Charles Robinson from the University of Delaware, who I think is an outstanding example of the pursuit of academic excellence. Through his work on Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, he has really done quite original, groundbreaking research that has made an essential difference in the study of that work and in his discipline. And now it's my pleasure to invite my colleague, Dr. Betsy Chapin, to come to the podium. Betsy is Associate Professor of English here at Gwynedd-Mercy and a treasured faculty member in the Honors Program, and she will introduce our very special guest. Betsy?
Thank you, Carol. I'm sure you all don't need me to tell you this, but I will say so anyway. Research is hard work. It takes commitment and it takes dedication. And I have to say, anyone who has seen the handwriting of Mary Shelley and of Percy Shelley will understand, they are so similar, will understand the dedication and commitment it takes for such scholarly work. Work that has left many scholars by the side of the road, exhausted, but Professor Robinson forged ahead, and we're all very grateful for that. All of his scholarly work, he has published in many journals. Keats Shelley Journal, the Byron Journal. He offers courses on the Romantics, of course, and he is in his 46th year at the University of Delaware. He was Director of Graduate Studies at the University of Delaware from 1981 to 1993. He was the Executive Director of the Byron Society of America for many years and co-chair of the Byron Society Collection at the University of Delaware, and very integral to bringing that collection into being. And I have seen some of that, and it is quite astounding. Please help me in welcoming Professor Charles Robinson.
If I'd known the introduction would have been so long, I would have cut down on the speech. I could give you my 5-minute version. Thank you. This is yours, and this is mine. Okay. I tend to boom, but you can all hear me in the back? Okay, good. This happens to be Duke Humphrey's room in the Bodleian Library in Oxford. They kept the manuscripts of Mary Shelley down here. It's a poor reproduction. I had a good one and I lost it. I took this one off the net and made one of those things. And my flash drive I couldn't find this morning, so we couldn't do that. And this, we're going to be talking about the manuscripts of Mary Shelley. In some ways, this thing never existed, but this is a reconstructed, one of the two large draft notebooks. And until a librarian and I put it together at the end of our kind of analysis, after 5 weeks and then another 3, we sort of put it together and say, you know, what did it look like? And only then did we discover, and you can barely see it here, the marbling on the side of the notebook. And reconstructing the notebook is very much like constructing the monster, and I'll make reference to that in a few minutes. I think I may come back to this because I have I have a writing problem that I would like you to consider and maybe solve for me. I haven't solved it in 10 years, and I'm still looking for the right person for the right answer. It's about the way in which Mary Shelley's fair copy was written in 14 lines, 19 lines, 14 lines, 19 lines, in a way that's not on lined paper, etc. Okay. I want to thank Carol Breslin for the invitation. Thank you for attending, listening to these ruminations. I've taught this novel every year for 45 years. I learn more and more about it. And as Betsy knows, I could go on for 45 minutes. I only have a half an hour. Okay, there goes a couple of pages. But I could go on for 3 hours without stopping, and I have been teaching this in seminars and that kind of thing. When I teach it sometimes as an epistolary novel, letters, as a science fiction novel, as a Promethean novel, as a doppelganger novel, as a feminist or birthing text, as a frame tale, very important in that regard, and as a source of some wonderful and then, of course, not so wonderful movies. But teaching Frankenstein, lecturing on Frankenstein, gives me an opportunity, as it does today, to investigate what is called the stemma, or the genealogy of the text, which is briefly outlined here. Some of you may know that if you've studied Frankenstein and written about Frankenstein, that there is what is called the so-called 1818 text, first edition, and the revised edition of 1831, and there are differences. And not only scholars of Frankenstein, but students of Frankenstein talk about those differences. Well, I complicate things a little bit more by talking about the Levin text of Frankenstein. It's a very fluid text in that regard, and as we study, and we'll make reference to this first page a little later on, as we study the genealogy, as we go from the text, which I hypothesize may have existed, to the draft, to the fair copy, to the proofs, to the second proofs or revises, to the first edition, to marked up first edition, etc., all the way to the third revised edition, 1831, we learn so much about the creative process. And working with the manuscripts is, as Betsy says, I mean, any kind of research is wonderful, but working with the manuscripts is just so exhilarating. I don't know whether if you've been, well, you're undergraduate students, you don't have time to read newspapers. I didn't. I read. If I have any advice to you as students, buy the New York Times or read it online every Sunday, and subscribe to the New Yorker for $25 a year because you are an educator or you are a student. And if I had to do my undergraduate days over from 58 to 62, and you know, what happened in the world? What do I know? I mean, I was studying. I shouldn't have been. I should have been doing a little bit more. Before beginning this, continuing this talk, I want to stress that the novel's theme, as we get into this. Oh no, I started to say something else. Okay, if you're reading the newspapers, penny drops here. If you're reading the newspapers in the past 5 or 6 days, you may have heard of Catherine Sutherland, a Jane Austen expert in Oxford, who is just put up on the internet, if you're a Jane Austen fan, the manuscripts of Jane Austen. And she's arguing that Jane Austen is not the purist, the stylist that we thought she might be, and that maybe William Gifford, John Murray's editor, was responsible for polishing her style. Well, needless to say, this is raising hackles in various camps, feminist and non-feminist alike. But I mean, Catherine Sutherland, whom I've met, and who asked me some very penetrating questions when I lectured in Oxford one time, or when the book was launched back in 2008, the hardback, she really knows her stuff. But if you can go to just type in Sutherland, Austen, you can go to the website, and you're going to see much as in the way that this opening does here. You're going to see the manuscript and a transcription of the manuscript, but it's all going to be digitalized, and it's all. I think it's going to be illuminating in terms of Jane Austen scholarship. Back to Frankenstein. When I teach it, my mantra is that it's a novel about the dangerous consequences of the pursuit of knowledge. That's it. I mean, that's exactly what it's about. I mean, yes, it's a birthing novel. Yes, it's doppelganger. But it all has it all somehow reduces itself to this pursuit of knowledge. And in doing it, it subsumes the 3 basic Western myths about knowledge. We know that Adam and Eve is the basic myth in the Christian world, or in the Jewish world as well, or in the Islam world. The story of Adam and Eve is a story about the dangerous consequences of the pursuit of knowledge. How do we know that it's important for Mary Shelley? Easy. The monster reads what? Paradise Lost, okay? And says, for example, I ought to be thy Adam, but I am rather the fallen angel. Says elsewhere, many times I considered Satan as the fitter emblem of my condition rather than Adam. Where is my Eve, he asks. The second myth about the dangerous consequences of the pursuit of knowledge is the Prometheus myth. Prometheus steals fire, representing knowledge, gives it to man, and in this case, not Adam and Eve are punished who steal the fire. Prometheus steals the fire, but mankind, whom he represents. Not mankind is punished, but in this case, Prometheus is punished, chained to a rock, and if you remember the myth, an eagle or a vulture comes daily to devour his heart or his liver, depending on which classical myth you are reading. But again, he steals, same myth, he steals fire or knowledge from Zeus, just as Adam and Eve stole knowledge, if you will. Do you not want to be like God? Stole knowledge from God. And how do we know that this is important? The subtitle of Frankenstein is The Modern Prometheus. The third myth, and my favorite one, is the one that comes out of Aristophanes' Myth of the Circle and Plato's Symposium. And I always ask my students, how many of you have read Plato's Symposium? And none say they have. And I say, well, you should, because it's great cocktail party. It's a great source for cocktail party chatter. It's a dialogue on love, and as for those of you who know, it's a bunch of gay guys getting around, getting drunk, standing around, drinking around a table and discussing the nature of love. And one person says, love is the oldest of the gods, yada, 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 sit down. Love is the youngest of the gods, yada, yada, sit down. Socrates wins, love is the just child of penury and plenty, nothing and everything. How do you know that, Socrates? Well, Diotima, the prophetess, told me, and he wins. Prior to that, Aristophanes gets up. Wonderful story. Anybody in the audience read Plato's Symposium? 60 pages. You know, Aristophanes gets up and says, love is the desire to make whole, complete, and entire what once was whole, complete, and entire. And they go, what's that mean, Aristophanes? He says, simple. When man was first created, he was globular. He had 4 arms and 4 legs, and he was, most creatures were androgynous, male, female. There were a few all M's running around, a few all F's running around. And being globular, they could get a rolling start from Mount Olympus and roll halfway up, because they were curious. Adam and Eve story all again. With their additional appendages, 4 arms, 4 legs, they could scale the remaining heights and get up and see what the gods were doing. The gods were angered by man's pride, presumption, and split man down the middle, so that never again would man intrude on the precincts of the gods. Just a wonderful story. It's the primal doppelganger story. Each of you has a double out there somewhere, and if God loves you, you might find that particular person to reunite, to reunite with. How do I know that this is important for Mary Shelley? She didn't know this in 1818, I don't think, because Percy Bysshe Shelley had not yet translated Plato's Symposium from Greek into English, nor had she yet transcribed it. She may have read it on her own, but in 1831, in the 1831 edition, Victor is, and it's not in this edition. It's not in any of these editions. It's in the Mary Shelley. No, that's 1818 as well. But in 1831, Victor's talking to Walton and says, "We are unfashioned creatures, but half made up. If one wiser, dearer, better than ourselves doth not lend his aid to perfectionate our weak and faulty natures. We are unfashioned creatures, but half made up." Clearly, this is an allusion back unto the story of man, globular, primal, intruding on the precincts of the god once again and split down the middle and punished. He's psychologically and physically incomplete. Same story in Othello. Some of you have read Othello. Hey, Brabantio, where's your daughter? Iago yells. He says, well, she's sleeping inside. He says, no, she's not. Where is she? She's making the beast with 2 backs. And then in the next line, the black ram is tupping your white ewe. But I mean, the beast with 2 backs is the Aristophanes globular figure. Despite this being a warning, a cautionary tale against the pursuit of knowledge, it at the same time reveals what what Betsy was talking about, the thrill of research. It reveals the exhilaration you get from creating and from creative energy. And the novel, indeed, may be read as a novel about the creative process, about the making of creatures, the making of monsters, the making and unmaking of human relationships, the making of revolutions. By the way, you can date Frankenstein with a perpetual calendar. It begins 17 dash dash and ends 17 dash dash, but there are days of the week and numbers of the month that enable you to figure things out. And lo and behold, Victor went off to Ingolstadt in 1789. And the monster went on his rampage in 1793. Okay, so Mary Shelley is clearly doing things with numbers. And how do we know that? Through the manuscript. It's not accidental. You find her crossing out numbers as well. Walton's journal, I have this later in here, Walton's journal, this is a frame tale, right? Walton is on a polar expedition. Victor is found. The monster is seen chasing Victor, and Victor tells the story to Walton. Walton writes to his sister, Margaret, and so there's it's a frame story. Walton tells the story of Victor. Victor tells the story of the monster. I'm going over this way. The monster is I'm being filmed here. The monster tells the story of the DeLacy's. And in the DeLacy story, there is the story of Safie. Guess what Safie means? Sophie, Sophia, wisdom. Embedded in the very middle of Frankenstein is a name that tells us that this indeed is a story about the dangerous consequences of the pursuit of knowledge. But what I was going to say here is the novel begins on December the 12th, I think it is, possibly the 11th. It ends on September the 13th. And if you subtract the one from the other, you get 276 days. Divided by 30, I ask my students who are not math majors, who have a great deal of difficulty in doing that dividing, and it comes out to 9 months, or the gestation period. And you see, is that me imposing what I want to see on this novel of creativity? No, I don't think so, because in the manuscript, Mary Shelley is changing dates, changing weeks, and doing different sequences of time to give us a result that I think is very, very central. Indeed, we find that Mary Shelley thinks about birthing even when she writes the novel and when she writes about the novel. When Victor is, the night that he goes in to create the monster, he enters his confinement. Okay? Now, many of you Americans don't understand that, but a British person instantly knows what confinement is. And I didn't know. I'd read this sentence for 100 times. And then I'm reading Mary Shelley's journal on September the 1st, 1817, the night before her daughter Clara is born, and in her journal she says, I enter my confinement. Okay? So Mary Shelley is embedding in the text hints that we should think in these terms. There are sexual images of the way in which the staircase goes up to the womb-like attic where he keeps his filthy tools, etc. I mean, he's not very gentle about that is Victor, about the birthing process. And when Mary Shelley in the 1831 text talks about the novel, she says on page 1, maybe line 5 of her introduction, she says, I was always asked as a young girl how as a young girl I could dilate upon such a hideous idea. And at the end of this, she says she has an affection for her novel, for it was the offspring of happy days. And she bid her hideous progeny, the monster and the novel, to go forth and prosper. And I think this, together with the 276 days, draws our attention to one way, not the only way, we can, in fact, read the text. As some of you know, and I want to get into the manuscripts as soon as possible, but I have one more introductory thing. Let's just set the scene. The novel had its origins. If there's time, we're going to talk about T2, Terminator 2, with Schwarzenegger. That's indeed a homage to Mary Shelley for reasons that are very, very complicated. The novel had its origins in that famous summer of 1816 in Geneva, Switzerland. And were it not for a fiery eruption of a volcano in Tambora in 1815, which threw volcanic dust into the atmosphere and caused in 1816 the coldest summer on record. It's called the year without a summer. There was snow in New England in June and July. There was killing frosts in July in Virginia. There was failed crops in England. Geneva just rained all of the time. But as a consequence of this rain, they sat around with Lord Byron telling ghost stories, and out of this is the genesis of Mary Shelley. Who were there? Well, there was the 18-year-old Mary Shelley. She begins this novel when she's 18, finishes it when she's 19, publishes it when she's 20. Her husband, not yet husband, they have 2 children, or one still surviving, Percy Bysshe Shelley, he's 23. Lord Byron has a villa. They go over there for the storytelling. He's 28. Claire Claremont, Mary Shelley's younger sister, is also 18, pregnant with Byron's child. And there's also a 21-year-old Edinburgh doctor by the name of John William Polidori who will commit suicide 5 years later. So you've got pregnancies, illegitimate births, suicides. You don't need to go and watch at 3 o'clock whatever the soap opera thing is. You know, just be a student of English or British literature. So at any rate, this is our cast of characters. So, but enough of volcanoes and background. Let's turn to the novel itself, which I hope has surprised you as something different than what you were led to expect by the film or other cultural representations of the novel. By the way, the 3rd edition of Frankenstein, the 1831 revised edition, was published on October the 31st, Halloween, 1831. On October 27th, today, in Mary Shelley's journal, 196 years ago, Mary Shelley says, write chapter 3.5, and she crosses out 3.5 to 2.5. Now we're able to figure out what that is. So, you know, there are some real resonances between me here today and what happened really not that long ago, especially when you realize that my grandfather was born in 1863, not long after Mary Shelley died. So, you know, history really isn't that long. And by the way, before your parents and grandparents, before your grandparents die, you know, take a video camera and say, tell me, you know, where did you go to school? Because when you get my age, you're going to say, why didn't I ask, right? So you need to get those records. I've done that. First edition. I'll worry about it. Okay. If you turn to the handouts, please. You will see. This is the stemma, the genealogy, and we'll talk a little bit about that. This text. What we have, 1816, 1817 draft. Okay. We have 87% of that draft. And it looks like this. Here's the draft, and then as you see on the first opening here, what I do is provide a transcription, word for word, comma for comma, of the draft, and then to the right of this double rule, I have the first edition. So you can see, in effect, if you will turn to the first opening and look up here for just a moment, and we'll look at the reproduction of it. Here is Mary Shelley drafting her text. She rules, puts a line down here. To the left of that rule, she and Percy will make corrections. And they will make corrections interlinearly. If you go to line 2, you see the word her. That's Mary's her, and you can see that word her right here very easily. By the way, underneath her to the right is INTERCESSION. That's how a double S, which looks like a P, was made back then. But if you go down to line 6, therefore, although, that's Percy's hand. So what I do is use a different font to represent Percy Bysshe Shelley's hand. And what I discovered, although we only have 87% of the novel, what I discovered that what we do have, out of the 72,000 word novel, anywhere from 4,000 to 5,000 words were written by Percy Bysshe Shelley. This does not make it into, out of her 20,000 word dissertation, probably I've got 2,000 words in there. It's not my dissertation, it's Betsy's. It's Mary Shelley's novel. She had an editor. Any novelist, historian, whatever, writing today has an editor who says, cut this chapter, change this sentence, and that kind of thing. Sometimes they're right, sometimes they're wrong. And Percy Bysshe Shelley editing Mary Shelley was sometimes right and sometimes wrong. But what I'm able to, or what you're able to do using this particular edition, and it's sold out, and to get it on adall.com, it'll cost you about a grand. And people it's just not there. They didn't print that many copies, and I wanted it. My expectation is that these 2 volumes would go into paperback, and on Halloween in every Borders in the world, it would be $49.95 with a candle and a box set. But that was not to be. That was not to be. And what happened instead is that the Bodleian Library in Oxford asked me to do a commercial edition. And what I did is, I have 2 texts here. For those of you who haven't seen it, there's a gray one and a white one. The white one is the 1818, I'm sorry, the white one is the draft. In other words, the stuff that was, the changes that were made in the fair copy, not here. The changes that were made in the proofs and the revises, not here. So the 1818 edition is a little bit different from this. In fact, while we're talking about that, I want to talk about something very important that I don't want want you to miss in this presentation. When Mary Shelley finished the draft, and by the way, the draft looks like this is a draft page, this is a draft page, this is a fair copy page. In other words, you're not going to hand that in to Sister Ethelreda as what I did. Sister Ethelreda had a very great impression on me as a youth. You're not going to hand this in to Sister Ethelreda as your writing assignment, what I did this summer, okay? But you would hand that in. And when you hand it in, the fair copy, the neat copy, with some cancellations occasionally, you'll see this, down in the bottom right corner, that what looks like ink specks, that's really a thumbprint. These pages of the fair copy actually went to the printer, and the printer is holding the paper and setting type, T, H, E, blank, M, A, N, etc. Okay? So you know that this page is the authority for the first edition. And if there's any difference, then the changes may have been made by the compositor. He didn't like it. Hey, I'm going to change this word. Or it was made in the proofs or something like that. But at any rate, after they finished the draft, she starts drafting in September 1816, and she finishes drafting, and gets married to Percy Bysshe Shelley in December, finishes drafting around March, April of 1817. They need to make a fair copy. When they do, and we don't have that much of the fair copy, but there's enough evidence to suggest that when they do, they transformed a novel that was conceptually, and in the draft, a 2-volume novel written in 33 chapters. The first edition is a 3-volume novel written in 23 chapters. What did they do? They did, if you open the last gathering, here, you find on the left margin the 1816-1817 draft, 33 chapters, Volume 1, and then Volume 2. And then you see the first edition, Volume 1, Volume 2, Volume 3, with 23 chapters. Now, some of the mutations were fairly ordinary. Chapters 1 and 2 of the draft become Chapter 1 of the first edition. But look what happens at Chapters 7 and part of 8. Chapter 7 and part of 8 becomes Chapter 4. No one has ever studied the aesthetic violence of somebody coming in, the Shelleys themselves, and say, okay, let's redesign the chapter orders of this novel. And I haven't taken the time to do that, but what I discovered for the first time, this is the first text that was ever in 33 chapters. I read it in 33 chapters. Guess what? A 33-chapter novel reads faster than a 23-chapter novel. Why? Chapters are shorter. I can get up and have another glass of wine, come back, oh boy, yeah, rather than slogging it through. But aesthetic damage is done. in one of the draft chapters, and maybe in two of the draft chapters, the chapter ends with, I will be with you on your wedding night. Okay? In the first edition, the second edition, the third edition, I will be with you on your wedding night is buried in the middle of a chapter. So those differences, together with the accelerated reading, makes this a worthwhile enterprise that takes us back to Mary Shelley's original conception. Now, it doesn't mean you can't change midstream. But did they think this thing out? Well, maybe they did. What they did, I didn't understand the meaning of these numbers until if you go to the second opening, they had, as they were drafting the one into the other, if you go to the second opening, you see the maths out in the margin, one set by Mary and one set by Percy. What they're doing is trying to figure out the number of words per chapter and pages that they need to take this two-volume thing and predict how it's going to lay out into a 3-volume thing. So that, I mean, they've got to stop, they've got to read chapter volume 1 ahead of time to know how things are going to proceed in volumes 2 and 3. So you really learn about the whole learn a lot about the whole creative process in this regard. The other thing that I think is significant, and I'm really skipping a lot of the second third of what I had to say. I may give you some topic sentences in a moment. But the second thing that these two texts do, we know, and in this first version, I represent Percy Bysshe Shelley's contributions with italic text. Okay. Then, in fairness to Mary, I thought, ooh, you know, what would this novel have been if Percy hadn't got his bloody fingers on it, all right? If he hadn't intervened. So what I do is I purged all of Percy's, restored the stuff that he canceled, where he rewrites, and also he sometimes would just purge to purge, all right? You know, it was too wordy. And so I restored all of that. And this gave an opportunity to read essentially what Mary Shelley brought to the breakfast table. You know, here it was before Percy got his hands on it. Now, what did Percy do? Well, and you know, these are my more recent discoveries. If I can find it here, yes, no, it's here somewhere. Percy, I need your number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The fair copy relates to. Sorry. No. Why isn't that? There it is. In general, what did he do? He added punctuation. He capitalized sometimes. He corrected misspellings. He added or deleted words to intensify meaning. Pain and misery became insupportable misery. I sort of like that better. He corrected errors in fact. He changes her relative pronouns that, which are really correct because they are restrictive, to which. He always did that. He corrected or improved grammar. An incorrect nominative becomes an objective. He frequently canceled the words and or but that she used to begin her sentences, and in the process got rid of a lot of 18-year-old coordination and substituted more sophisticated cause and effect in subordination. He improved some of Mary's unparalleled. This is doing freshman English stuff. Okay, what does he do? Mary Shelley writes in an unparalleled. You go parallelism out in the margin. Mary Shelley wrote, "Some bat or the harsh and interrupted croaking of the frogs." So some bat or croaking. If you've ever diagrammed sentences, as you should. Everybody should diagram sentences. You know, it's non-parallel. The bat and the croaking of the frogs. No, it's so what does Percy do? Some bat or the frogs whose harsh and interrupted croaking. It's a little more clunky, but it's grammatically correct. He got rid of wordiness, etc. Mary Shelley would frequently say this. I have forbidden my students to say this. After this, there must be a noun. Okay? This what? Last word, last phrase, last sentence, last year. I don't know what this is. And so she had said one place this, and he changes it to this deficiency. In fact, it's actually, I'm not sure. Yes, it's right here. Here's chapter 1 of MWS by yourself and MWS PBS, and it's down here. Yes. Henry Clerval was the son of my brother, etc. And Mary Shelley, line 2 over on the left-hand side of the second paragraph, compensated for this, and Percy adds the word deficiency. Finally, and then maybe questions can bring up other things. Finally, the one thing I discovered is that Mary Shelley without Percy was much more colloquial than they were together as a team. For example, Mary writes that Victor should go to the university. Makes sense to me. Anybody in 2010 makes sense to them. Percy writes, should become a student at the university. He didn't think go was elegant enough. How about this one? Mary writes that Victor's mother, who catches fever and dies from the stepdaughter, or from the daughter, Elizabeth brought in, she entered the sick chamber, quote, before it was safe. Makes sense to me. Percy crosses that out before the danger of infection was past. Okay. Victor had plenty of leisure. Plenty of. Sufficient. All right? And I would do the same thing. If Betsy had written, there were plenty of problems here, I would have said, this is colloquial, dignified a little bit. The monster was cutting a great deal of wood. Guess what? A great quantity of wood. And where's the one that I like so much? Well, anyway, I do some of these in the introduction to this book. So, working with the manuscripts and restoring a text by getting rid of an intervention enables me to understand, and also before both of the Shelleys, in effect, transformed a 2-volume novel into a 3-volume novel with different chapter configurations, gave me an opportunity to understand so much more about the way this text was put together and about its meaning. One final remark in this regard. I was privileged to work 5 weeks from this manuscript. I had made my transcriptions using high-resolution black and white photographs in 1994-95. By the way, it only took Mary Shelley 9 months to write this novel, and she did this raising a kid and dealing with Percy. It took me, speaking about the labors of research, it took me 2 years of 60 hours a week and ignoring everybody in the family, working with WordPerfect 6.0 for DOS and designing that thing to get that done. And I was going to say something, and now where was I? Let's see. Where are the breadcrumbs? One thing. Oh yes. So I was privileged to work in the Bodleian Library in that beautiful room. But Bruce Barker Benfield, who is just a phenomenal librarian. Any librarians here today? Well, we have librarians. Okay. He's a wonderful librarian. He would collect the manuscripts at 9:30 2 or 3 mornings each week. After he sort of understood, I sort of knew what I was doing, and he was teaching me a lot anyway. And he would collect the manuscripts, and we would swoop down the back wooden stairs to the Bodleian with the manuscripts, out through the archway, into the Clarendon building, where his office was, and lay the manuscripts out on the table, and really put Frankenstein back together. Because what we had was 188 pages, okay? And we had to restore those 188 pages. Well, how do you do it? Well, first of all, you have to understand that a book is made of gatherings, okay? Pages 1, 2, so page 1 and 16 are conjoined. Here's 1 and here's 16. And then here's 1, 2, 3, and 4, next to 13 and 14, etc. And also, you're going to have blue here, you're going to have blue here. You're also going to discover that when the pages were torn apart, as you put them back together, you're going to discover evidence that proves that the pages were together when they were first written. How do we know that? Because in the central bifolium, you would find this over in the torn page, and it was written there. You would also find offset ink blots, inks wet like that, so you know that this page was facing that page. You would also find the pencil splaying. So, you know, you're writing here, and when you put the whole thing together in the picture that I saw, and you put it like that, oh, the E that goes over here, it trails off onto the 4-inch. But we had this wonderful opportunity of putting this manuscript back together, and at least one afternoon the lightning was shining and illuminating our confinement there in his office. But even better than that, in 1815, Percy and Mary visited this building, the Clarendon building. And in 1790-something, Elizabeth, Clerval, and Victor visited the building. That's not in any edition, not even in mine, because, yes, it is in mine. It is in mine, because it was excised and replaced for the first edition. Nobody ever knew this. So they actually go to Oxford. So here in Bruce Barker Benfield's office, in the present, we are dealing with the fictional past in that building and the historical past in that building. And even now, you know, chills go up the spine. Thank you very much. If we have 10 books and only 10 minutes, the questions have to be limited. They have to be short questions.
Fascinating presentation, thank you. I've handed out cards. If you have questions, please pass those cards and we'll...
We can do it. We can just do it from the audience. Does anybody have a question about?
My idea was that if we ran out of time and the students had questions, they could still get a book later.
Oh, okay, good. Well, let's do both.
Okay,
Ask the questions.
well then who would like to do it without cards? Yes, Sean.
I have a question. Dr. Robinson, have you had, before doing this, experience with like deciphering and studying handwriting, or is this just something you took upon yourself?
I learned as I went on. In 1976, when I published the Byron Shelley book, I had discovered a Mary Shelley short story published, and my editor says, "Do you have anything else?" I said, "Sure, I'll do an edition of Mary Shelley's tales." And it turned out that some of them were in manuscript, so I really had to learn the hand there. And then I had to learn that, you know, what do you do with an ampersand rather than an and? Well, depending on the nature of the product. If it's going to be a commercial product, you might want to make it A&D. What about W raised H superscript with a period under it, which stands for which? Now, if I'm editing letters, as I am now, the letters of William Hazlitt, I'm going to keep it ampersand because I want the character of that original expression in an epistle to be represented. So you have to make those decisions as you go along. What do you do with misspellings? Do you correct the misspellings or not? Do you footnote the corrections of the misspelling? Do you do it silently? What about punctuation? Do you add your punctuation to make it rhetorical and grammatical, or do you respect their punctuation, which may not be rhetorical or grammatical? So you just sort of learn by the seat of the pants. And by the time I got invited by Lord Abinger to do these, I had done Mary Shelley's Proserpine and Midas in a much more feeble way in a 1992 thing, but the Bodleian liked what I had done, the fidelity of the transcriptions, etc., and then they invited me to do that. So it really was a series of stepping stones all the way from, and my career has been accidental. I didn't want to edit the letters of Hazlitt, and the Haslittians say, I discovered some Hazlitt letters published 27 years ago, and published 2 years ago, and 4 that came out last week. And I'm a good editor. I track down things. I mean, sometimes it takes a month to annotate one letter because you have to read an entire journal looking for stray references, etc. So it's been a series of accidental things all the way through.
Okay, next question, please. Yes.
I recall you describing the scene with Byron and the Shelleys and everyone. Were there other romantic works of the time that influenced Shelley to write her book, or was it more of an original?
Well, they were reading ghost stories at that time, German ghost stories translated into French, I believe. And also Mary Shelley alludes to, or has the monster read, Goethe's Sorrows of Young Werther, The Ruins of the Past by Volney, Paradise Lost. And clearly that whole business of the dangerous consequence of the pursuit of knowledge is a presence in there, because she's got Milton sort of standing on her shoulder in this regard. Her father her father and her stepmother were publishers. She herself had started writing, but she had done extensive reading. She clearly had read some of the Gothic novels out of the past. It is and it is not a Gothic novel. It is and is not a science fiction novel. In many ways, it's sui generis. She published it, by the way, anonymously for a number of reasons.
Okay, third question. What aspects, if any, of Percy's corrections hinder the original work of Mary's?
It may be that Mary, and I don't know whether she knew this at age 18 or not, were her colloquialisms, or was she trying to write in character? That's a question that I avoided, or avoided trying to answer at any rate. And there are times when, like, yes, Percy makes it parallel, but makes it clunky. And at other times, there are some wonderful moments. One time, and there are 5 or 6 sections in Frankenstein where Percy goes on at length, maybe 100 words out in the margin. Those usually are for the benefit of the novel. Also, very important, on the back of your sheet, I'll only take a second to do this, you will notice the difference between the draft over here and the fair copy. Why such a major difference? If you look at the other pages, the parallel text of the draft and the fair copy, here's the draft and here's the fair copy. But what happens, the last 11 and a half pages of the draft were taken over by Percy. And he rewrites the end. And in rewriting the end, he gives it the flair that the end now currently has. So if you look at the last page, Mary had originally written, and even Percy had corrected at line 17 in the left margin, I shall ascend my pile triumphantly, and the flame that consumes my body will give rest and blessings, change to enjoyment or tranquility to my mind. So Percy, why Percy does these last 11 and a half pages, nobody knows. You know, Mary's sick, he says, I'll do it for you. But he embellishes. You know, when Mary fair copies, one of the wonderful things about seeing the fair copy and the draft and the fair copy, you just saw Mary at work. You know, the monster enters the room and says, the monster enters the room and says, okay? When Percy does it, the monster enters the room and says, the monster full of anger and self-loathing circumambulates the cottage that he will soon conflagrate. And so that consumes my body becomes, look at line 20 in the right margin, exalt in the agony of the torching flames, the light of that conflagration will fade away, my ashes will be swept into the sea by the winds, my spirit will sleep in peace, whoever thinks will surely not think thus, that you, he sprung from the cabin window. I mean, is this better or worse? It's different. It's different. And it's a different style. And Mary's is bolder, and is that better? Boy, that's a tough call. That's a tough call.
Okay, our time is up. We have time for one more quick question, and those who have not had a chance to ask questions, put them in the card. We'll see that you get a book. Here's the last question. How do you get 2 or 3 volumes from the original into half the little book being given out today?
Because, in fact, I was so surprised, because Mary Shelley's line, you know, yes, it looks busy, etc., but look over here. Upon crime as a distant evil, benevolence and generosity. She's getting 6 words per line. Once I discovered she's getting 6 words per line, I got a page with this big folio. You know, I got this big emptiness here. That's when it came to me, aha, I'm going to graph the first edition down here, line by line. So on one page you can see what Mary wrote, what she or Percy, they interlinearly or marginally corrected, and then what a few months later was printed in the first edition. So you could you could just see the transformation of the text as it migrated from handwriting to a published first edition. So it's a very short novel. It's probably the shortest triple-decker, a triple-decker being a 3-volume novel at this time. And with only 72,000 words. That's not a lot. And if you were fortunate enough to find the first edition, buy it, even if it's 50 grand, because you can sell it for 75. It cost 16 and 6 when it was first produced. 16 and 6, that's almost a pound, 20 shillings to the pound. A pound back then was worth $5, so it's about a $4 book or so. When Delaware bought its first edition, I had them buy it from a book dealer, $1,500. The last one went for about $75,000. Okay, so there were only 500 copies produced, but I needed that volume in order. There were changes in the revises, and I said, oh my God! And then Percy makes a reference in a letter. You know, I'm not going to make the big changes that I made in this sheet and in the last sheet. I thought, oh, big changes. So I compared first edition with draft and fair copy and found out indeed that they didn't match up in 2 places. I rushed to the library. I found I knew the first edition was there. And what did I discover? I discovered that one set of changes were in one gathering, the sheet, and another in the other at the beginning of volume 3. So I know, and by the way, Percy and/or Mary were making those revisions in October of 1817. And the novel was published January 1st, 1818, but Godwin, Mary Shelley's father, had his copy by at least early December of 1817. So those stop press changes, or changes in proofs and second proofs or revises, were made very late in the game. I'm not sure what the question was.
I think you more than answered.
With the emphasis on more. But I get excited about this, and it's fun. So if you have any kind of letters in your library or account books from the 1920s that somebody has donated, go in and look at the handwriting. Learn how to decipher it. Feel. I mean, it really takes you back in time. I also did a Penguin. I did the electronic enhancements to the Penguin edition of Frankenstein. I added 100 pages, and my wife and I 2 summers ago had the joy and the sorrow of sitting down and watching 25 to 30 Frankenstein movies. I did a filmography, but I have to give you my 2 favorites. Frankenweenie. No, don't go there. It was Tim Burton's first 20-minute movie about a little boy whose dog runs out into the road and is killed, and he reanimates it. And there's cemeteries and crooked crosses, and Sofia Coppola, who's racist, I think. I didn't like all young people like that movie. Lost in Translation. My wife and I hated it, but never mind about that. But Sofia Coppola was in that movie. And the other one was Franken-Thumb. There's a thing called Thumbation. I don't know whether you've ever seen Thumbation. Another 20-minute movie with Igor and Frankenstein and all of that. But they were just delightful. And of course, still Young Frankenstein is one of the best. And just as a final remark, because some of you either aren't going to class or don't need to go to class, T2. So I'm going to Oxford in 95 or 96, maybe 96, and they're going to interview me about Frankenstein. He said, I'm going to ask you about T2. I said, what are you going to ask me about T2 for? Terminator 2, Schwarzenegger. It's one of James Cameron's early movies. And he says, I think it's a homage to Mary Shelley. And I said, well, yeah. So I popped it in about 1 a.m. the night before I flew BA to London, and I'm taking notes, and lo and behold, LA is destroyed on August 31st, 1997. And I'm going, August 31st, 1997. Why does that sound familiar? No, August 29th, 1997. Why is that? Ooh, penny drops. Mary Shelley's birthday was August 30th, 1797. So if Schwarzenegger from the past can bring back the computer, or can, what is it? If he can go back into the past and destroy the computer chip that led to the making of the bomb or the elaborate network that leads to the destruction of LA on August the 30th, on August 29th of 1997, the next day, Mary Shelley can celebrate her 200th birthday without being responsible for the Industrial Revolution through Frankenstein that led to, he said, that's brilliant! He said, I'm going to Hollywood and tell James Cameron about this. I said, well, you know, he probably did it on purpose. He went to Hollywood and he emailed me. Cameron was off on location, so he never got to ask the question. But there are, for those of you who've seen the movie, Schwarzenegger is incarnated with lightning at the very beginning of the movie, and he's kind of, you know, he's an android. He's not a human, but he is more human than. And so there are touches of Frankenstein there. And so you see its manifestations in all forms, from Frankenberry to Halloween to the movies that you might not even think have Frankensteinian moments. Thank you again.